Sarah Chen's consciousness slammed back into existence as Taylor Swift's 22 blared from her ancient iPhone 4S. Her hand instinctively reached out to silence the unfamiliar tune, only to freeze mid-motion. This wasn't her sleek apartment in downtown Seattle. This was her old dorm room at Stanford University, complete with the same cheap fairy lights strung haphazardly across water-stained ceiling tiles. Her heart thundered against her ribcage as she took in the One Direction poster she'd forgotten even owning, the stack of introductory business textbooks she'd sold years ago, and the pink butterfly chair that had broken during junior year. The morning sun filtered through the same dusty blinds she'd meant to clean but never did, casting familiar shadows on the lime green walls she'd once thought were cheerful. "Sarah, are you finally up? We have Professor Williams' class in like 40 minutes. That voice, that perfectly modulated, always slightly concerned voice that had haunted her therapy sessions for years. Jessica Walsh stepped out of their shared bathroom, a cloud of vanilla-scented body spray announcing her presence before she fully emerged. She looked exactly as Sarah remembered her at 19. Tall, willowy, with honey blonde hair pulled into an effortlessly messy bun, and wearing a Stanford sweatshirt that Sarah would later discover had been purchased with Sarah's own stolen credit card. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jessica's head tilted just so, her green eyes widening with practiced concern. It was the same expression she'd worn 3 years later, or was it 7 years ahead, when she'd consoled Sarah about not getting the Goldman Sachs position, all while knowing she'd sabotaged Sarah's application and secured the spot for herself. Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. The date glared back at her, September 15, 2015. She was 19 again, somehow transported back to the beginning of sophomore year. Back to before Jessica systematically dismantled her life with the precision of a surgeon and the conscience of a shark. "I'm fine," Sarah managed, her 28-year-old mind racing behind her 19-year-old eyes. "Just had a really weird dream." "Must have been some dream. You're shaking." Jessica perched on the edge of Sarah's bed, her hand reaching out to touch Sarah's shoulder. It took everything in Sarah not to flinch away from the contact. "Maybe you're coming down with something? I could take notes for you in William's class if you want to rest." The offer seemed so genuine, so caring. Just like when Jessica had offered to review Sarah's business proposal before the entrepreneurship competition, only to steal the entire concept and present it as her own. Just like when she'd offered to host Sarah's 20th birthday party, only to ensure every photo posted made Sarah look drunk and unstable right when internship applications were due. "No," Sarah said too quickly, then forced herself to soften her tone. "No, thanks. I'm good. Wouldn't want to miss the lecture on market analysis fundamentals." A lecture she still remembered, even 9 years later, because it had formed the basis of the business strategy Jessica would eventually steal. Jessica's smile flickered for just a millisecond, so brief that 19-year-old Sarah had never noticed it. But 28-year-old Sarah caught it, just like she now caught the calculating look that flashed through Jessica's eyes. "If you're sure." Jessica stood, adjusting her perfectly coordinated outfit. "I'll grab us coffee from the grind before class. Your usual vanilla latte?" Sarah nodded, watching as Jessica gathered her designer backpack, paid for with daddy's money. She'd always claimed, though Sarah later learned Jessica had been systematically stealing and reselling textbooks from their entire floor. As the door clicked shut behind her roommate, Sarah sank back against her pillows, mind spinning. She had a second chance, a reset. And this time, she wasn't the naive girl who trusts a snake wearing a friend's smile. This time, she would be ready. The study room in Green Library had always been Sarah's favorite spot on campus, with its oak-paneled walls and emerald green reading lamps. Now, watching Jessica Walsh work her magic on their study group, it felt more like watching a spider spin its web. "Oh no!" Jessica's cry of dismay pierced the quiet as her paper coffee cup accidentally toppled onto Michael Torres's MacBook. Sarah's fingers dug into her textbook as she watched the scene unfold, a scene she'd dismissed as clumsy misfortune 9 years ago. My thesis draft was on there. Michael ran his fingers through his dark curls, panic etching across his face. His coding project, the one that would later earn him a prestigious internship, was supposedly lost in the coffee-soaked keyboard. Use my laptop. Jessica pulled out her sleek silver MacBook Air, her voice dripping with concern. I'm so sorry, Michael. Please, you can work on it here while I take your laptop to the tech center. They know me there. Sarah watched Michael's hesitation dissolve under Jessica's earnest green-eyed gaze. 9 years ago, Sarah hadn't noticed how Jessica's offer came a bit too quickly, how her laptop was already open and booting up. She certainly hadn't known about the keylogger that would capture every keystroke, giving Jessica access to Michael's project long after his own laptop mysteriously couldn't be saved. That's really nice of you, Jess, Sarah said, keeping her voice neutral while her mind raced. But doesn't the tech center close at 5 on Thursdays? It's almost 4:45. A flash of annoyance crossed Jessica's face, so quick anyone else might have missed it. Oh, you're right. Maybe we should all go now? I'd hate for Michael to lose his work. I have a backup on my cloud drive, Michael said, relief evident in his voice. I can just use the library computers. Sarah caught the slight tightening of Jessica's jaw, the first crack in her perfectly crafted mask of concern. It was the same tell she'd shown years later, when Sarah had finally confronted her about the stolen business proposal. Later that evening, Sarah sat cross-legged on her bed, documenting the day's events in a password-protected journal app on her phone. The coffee incident was just the beginning. She'd watched Jessica work the room during their evening study session, each move calculated with chess master precision. There was the casual mention of the upcoming Martinez family party. Sarah, isn't your mom friends with Mrs. Martinez? So weird you weren't invited. Designed to plant seeds of social exclusion. The strategic positioning next to James Chen during their group discussion, knowing he was Sarah's research partner for their upcoming business project. The random photos she took of their study session, somehow always catching Sarah at unflattering angles while she was mid-sentence or looking confused. A soft knock at their door made Sarah quickly close the app. Jessica breezed in, fresh from her evening shower, smelling of expensive jasmine shampoo she claimed her aunt bought in Paris, the same aunt who, Sarah later learned, didn't exist. Hey, Rumi. Jessica settled onto her bed, hair wrapped in a turban. Can we have a girl talk moment? Sarah's pulse quickened. She remembered this conversation from her first life. The night Jessica had masterfully extracted information about Sarah's family's investment firm. Details that would later prove devastating in the wrong hands. Of course, Sarah forced a smile, sliding her phone under her pillow. This time, she was ready. This time, she understood the game. I'm worried about Michael. Jessica's voice dropped conspiratorially. Did you notice how stressed he seemed today? I feel like there's something going on with him. As Jessica wove her web of seemingly innocent concern, Sarah watched the performance with new eyes. Each sympathetic head tilt, each worried sigh, each casual question designed to dig for information. It was all so obvious now, like watching a magician's trick once you knew where to look for the hidden cards. The real trick would be playing along while laying her own groundwork. Because this time, Sarah wasn't just watching the game unfold, she was changing the rules. You want to join the cybersecurity club? Professor Zhang's eyebrows rose slightly as he reviewed Sarah's application. Your focus is business administration, correct? Sarah sat perfectly straight in the hard plastic chair, aware that Jessica was probably already wondering why she'd skipped their usual Thursday coffee meetup. Yes, but in today's digital age, understanding cybersecurity is crucial for any business leader. Plus, she added with a carefully crafted smile, it would look unique on my resume. What she couldn't tell him was that she needed to learn how to protect herself from the digital warfare Jessica would eventually wage against her. In her previous life, she'd never understood how Jessica had accessed her private emails, her cloud storage, her social media accounts. Now, she intended to close every possible vulnerability. The cybersecurity meetings became her sanctuary. 3 hours every week where she knew Jessica couldn't follow. She absorbed everything. Digital forensics, encryption protocols, secure communication methods. Where Jessica borrowed her phone 2 weeks later to call her mom, Sarah was ready. The activity logging app was already installed, recording every swipe, every screenshot, every attempted access. But technology was just one front in this war. Maria, Sarah called out, jogging across the quad to catch up with her former friend, future friend. The timeline confusion still gave her headaches. Hey, I loved your piece in the Stanford Daily about student privacy rights. Maria Delgado turned, her camera hanging around her neck as always. In Sarah's original timeline, Jessica had orchestrated a falling out between them during junior year. By the time Sarah discovered Jessica's role, Maria had already transferred to Northwestern. Thanks. Maria smiled, adjusting her glasses. Not many people actually read my articles. Are you kidding? Your investigation into the campus card system's data collection was eye-opening. Sarah fell into step beside her. I'm actually working on a project about digital privacy in business. Would you want to grab coffee and talk about it? The pieces were falling into place. Each connection she rebuilt, each relationship she strengthened, was another barrier between Jessica and her goals. But her masterstroke came in the form of Professor Hammond's business ethics research project. I think it's wonderful you want to volunteer, Sarah. Professor Hammond beamed at her across his cluttered desk. We need students who understand the importance of ethical business practices. Actually, Sarah leaned forward. I was wondering if my roommate Jessica could join too. She's brilliant at organizational psychology, and she'd be perfect for analyzing case studies. Professor Hammond's face lit up at the suggestion, exactly as Sarah had hoped. Keep your friends close and your enemies under the watchful eye of the university's strictest ethics professor. Back in their dorm room that evening, Sarah watched Jessica react to her carefully laid trap. The business ethics project? Jessica's nose wrinkled slightly. I don't know, Sarah. It sounds kind of boring. Professor Hammond has connections at all the top firms, Sarah mentioned casually, knowing Jessica wouldn't be able to resist. Plus, he's on the committee for the entrepreneurship competition. The gleam in Jessica's eyes was almost too easy to spot now. Well, when you put it that way, it could be good for networking. As Jessica turned back to her laptop, already plotting how to use this new opportunity, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. In her previous life, she played checkers while Jessica played chess. But this time, Sarah was playing three-dimensional chess, while Jessica was still setting up her board. That night, Sarah updated her encrypted journal with new observations. Jessica's tells were becoming clearer. The slight tightening of her smile when plans didn't go her way, the too casual way she asked about other students' projects, the calculated accidental meetings with influential professors. But Sarah's most crucial advantage wasn't just knowing Jessica's moves, it was understanding her endgame. And this time, Sarah was writing a completely different ending to their story. The Goldman Sachs email arrived exactly when Sarah knew it would. 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. She kept her face carefully neutral as she read it in the campus coffee shop, aware that Jessica was watching her reaction over the rim of her vanilla latte. What is it? Jessica asked, right on cue. Goldman Sachs interview, Sarah said, allowing a hint of excitement to color her voice. Next Thursday at 2 p.m. She counted silently in her head. 3, 2, 1. Next Thursday? Jessica's eyes widened with perfectly practiced concern. Oh no, Sarah. That's the day of your surprise. I mean, she clapped her hand over her mouth in feigned dismay. Sarah fought back a smile. In her previous life, this moment had sent her into a panic, torn between a life-changing interview and the elaborate birthday celebration Jessica had allegedly spent weeks planning. She'd missed the interview, choosing friendship over opportunity, only to later discover that Jessica had scheduled her own Goldman Sachs interview for the following morning. A surprise. Sarah tilted her head, watching Jessica squirm with fake guilt. For me? I've been planning this for weeks. Jessica sighed, dropping her hand. Everyone's already confirmed. Maria, Michael, even Professor Hammond said he'd stop by. I can't believe I didn't check the date better. The performance was masterful, really. The slight tremor in her voice, the way her eyes glistened with unshed tears of disappointment. 9 years ago, Sarah had fallen for it completely. The interview's at 2, Sarah said thoughtfully. When's the surprise supposed to be? That's the thing. Everyone could only make it at 2:30. I know the interview's important, but Jessica bit her lip. Maybe you could reschedule. Sarah made a show of checking her email again. The recruiter says this is the only slot available before their final selection. She watched Jessica's face carefully. But hey, maybe I could do both. The interview's in Palo Alto. I could grab an Uber right after and only be a little late to whatever you've planned. Oh, but Jessica's smile faltered for a microsecond. The surprise really needs you there at the start. It's kind of time sensitive. Then I guess I'll have to miss it, Sarah said firmly, taking a sip of her coffee to hide her satisfaction at Jessica's barely concealed shock. I really can't miss this interview opportunity. What Jessica didn't know was that Sarah had been preparing for this moment for weeks. The portfolio she'd assembled was bulletproof, including a group project that Jessica had tried to sabotage, but this time Sarah had documented every step of her contributions. She'd also accidentally left open a browser tab showing interview tips from a Goldman Sachs alumnus, knowing Jessica would snoop through her laptop. The day of the interview arrived bright and clear. Sarah dressed in her carefully chosen outfit, not the awkward suit Jessica had encouraged her to buy, but a sleek blazer and pencil skirt combination that she knew photographed well from any angle. As she stepped out of their dorm room, she heard Jessica on the phone. Yes, everything's set for 2:30. No, she has no idea. Sarah smiled to herself as she headed to her interview. What Jessica didn't know was that Sarah had arranged her own surprise. Her laptop, left conspicuously on her desk, was running a slideshow as her screensaver. Mixed in with her study notes and family photos were screenshots, Jessica's manipulative texts to other students, her attempts to access Sarah's accounts, her contradicting stories about the surprise party guest list. The party would still happen at 2:30, but by the time Sarah arrived, fashionably late and fresh from nailing her interview, those screenshots would have been cycling on her laptop for hours, catching the attention of early arriving guests. The whispers would have already started. The seeds of doubt would be planted. For the first time in either timeline, Sarah felt truly in control. The game was changing, and Jessica had no idea she was already 3 moves behind. The library's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the empty study room at 11:43 p.m. Sarah appeared to be dozing over her marketing textbook, but behind her closed eyes, she was counting Jessica's footsteps as they approached her table. Her tracking software pinged silently on her phone. Unauthorized login attempt detected. In her previous life, Sarah had never understood how Jessica had accessed her entrepreneurship proposal. Now, watching through barely open eyes, she saw Jessica slide into the seat across from her, carefully lifting the lid of Sarah's laptop. Having trouble sleeping? Sarah asked quietly, not opening her eyes. The sharp intake of breath was deeply satisfying. Oh, Sarah, you startled me. I was just... Jessica's hands withdrew from the laptop like she'd been burned. I thought you might want to head back to the dorm. It's getting late. Funny, Sarah finally opened her eyes, meeting Jessica's startled gaze. I could have sworn I heard typing. The next morning, the Stanford Confessions page featured a new anonymous post, wondering how the daughter of Chen Industries is affording those designer bags when daddy's company is bleeding money. #trust fund fraud. Sarah smiled as she read it over breakfast. In her previous life, this post had devastated her, the beginning of a whisper campaign that had shattered her reputation. Now, it was exactly what she'd been waiting for. Did you see that awful post? Jessica slid into the seat opposite her in the dining hall, eyes wide with manufactured concern. I can't believe someone would write that about you. Want me to report it? Already handled, Sarah said calmly, buttering her toast. I had an interesting chat with the page admin about IP addresses and cyberbullying policies. She watched with hidden satisfaction as Jessica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Oh, I didn't know you knew the admin. I know lots of things now, Sarah said, letting just a hint of steel enter her voice. The war escalated quickly after that. When Jessica tried to hack into Sarah's cloud storage that evening, she found herself locked out of her own accounts instead. Sarah's cybersecurity club lessons paying off beautifully. When anonymous emails about Sarah's unstable behavior began circulating to professors, they were quickly countered by Sarah's documented evidence of academic excellence and leadership. But Jessica's masterstroke came during their business ethics project presentation. As Sarah began her portion of the presentation, the projector suddenly displayed her private social media messages instead of her slides. Or rather, it displayed the fake conversations Sarah had planted there, knowing Jessica would find them. Messages that painted a story of Sarah's growing awareness, of evidence being gathered, of allies being assembled. She watched Jessica's face drain of color as she realized she'd just exposed her own snooping to Professor Hammond. "Is everything all right?" Professor Hammond asked, peering at the screen in confusion. "Just a technical glitch," Sarah said smoothly, switching back to her presentation. "As I was saying about ethical business practices." That night, Sarah sat in Maria's dorm room, finally allowing herself to process the day's events. "I can't believe she thought that would work." Maria shook her head, passing Sarah a cup of tea. "But then again, it always worked before, didn't it?" Sarah nodded, thinking of her previous life, of how isolated and helpless she'd felt. She's getting desperate. She knows her usual tactics aren't working, but she doesn't understand why. "What do you think she'll do next?" Sarah took a sip of tea, considering. The entrepreneurship competition was approaching, the event that, in her previous life, had been Jessica's ultimate triumph and Sarah's complete devastation. "Something big," Sarah said finally. "She needs a win, and she needs it soon." But this time, she pulled out her laptop, opening a folder labeled Plan B, "Will be ready." As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a notification, another unauthorized access attempt. This time trying to breach her competition proposal files. But instead of her real proposal, Jessica would find exactly what Sarah wanted her to see, a masterfully crafted decoy that would become the ultimate trap. The entrepreneurship competition finals were held in Stanford's newest auditorium, all gleaming glass and polished wood. Sarah sat in the third row, watching Jessica prepare at the podium, her confidence radiating like a supernova about to collapse. "Your presentation is fifth, right?" Maria whispered beside her, camera ready. "After Jessica's?" Sarah nodded, her USB drive heavy in her blazer pocket. She'd spent weeks crafting this moment, laying every piece with surgical precision. The stolen proposal Jessica was about to present wasn't just a decoy, it was a trap 3 months in the making. "Good morning, everyone." Jessica's voice rang clear through the auditorium. "Today, I'm excited to present EcoChick, a revolutionary sustainable fashion marketplace that will transform how we think about clothing consumption." Sarah watched the judges lean forward, intrigued. The proposal was brilliant, she had to admit. She'd designed it to be. Every market analysis, every financial projection, every innovative feature was meticulously crafted to appeal to both investors and environmentally conscious consumers. "Our proprietary algorithm," Jessica continued, clicking to the next slide, "will match users with sustainable brands based on their style preferences and environmental impact priorities." Professor Hammond scribbled something in his notebook. Sarah knew exactly what he was writing, the same notes he'd make in her previous life when Jessica had stolen her real proposal. But this time, something was different. "As you can see from our financial projections," Jessica gestured to the complex graphs behind her, "we expect a return on investment within the first 18 months, with a projected market penetration of..." She trailed off, frowning at the numbers. Sarah held her breath. This was it, the moment when Jessica would realize that the apparently perfect proposal had fatal flaws woven into its very foundation. Jessica clicked back a slide, then forward again. The market analysis contradicted the financial projections. The user acquisition costs didn't align with the marketing budget, and embedded in the corner of each slide, visible only if you knew where to look, was a tiny digital watermark, proof that the document had been copied from Sarah's files. "Ms. Walsh," one of the judges leaned forward, "these numbers seem inconsistent with your earlier statements." "I can explain." Jessica's voice took on a slightly higher pitch, her tell when she was losing control of a situation. "The variations in the projections account for..." Perhaps. Professor Hammond said quietly, "You could explain why the document properties showed this presentation was created by Sarah Chen." The auditorium fell silent. Sarah watched as Jessica's perfectly crafted facade began to crack. She could see the moment Jessica realized she'd been outplayed, that every file she'd stolen, every proposal she'd accessed, had been deliberately placed for her to find. "I think there's been a mistake." Jessica's laugh was brittle. "I must have copied the wrong file." "Actually," Sarah stood, USB drive in hand, "I think this is a perfect time for my presentation. It might clear up some confusion." As she walked to the podium, she could feel Jessica's eyes burning into her. But unlike 9 years ago, Sarah felt no fear, no uncertainty. She plugged in her drive, and the screen lit up with her real proposal: EduTech Bridge, revolutionizing access to education through AI integration. "What you just saw," of Sarah began, her voice steady, "was an example of how easily digital theft can be traced. My actual proposal has nothing to do with fashion or sustainability. Instead, I'd like to show you how blockchain and AI can transform educational access globally." The judges straightened in their seats, clearly intrigued by this unexpected turn of events. From the corner of her eye, Sarah saw Jessica sink into a chair, her face ashen, as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. But this wasn't just about exposing Jessica's theft. As Sarah launched into her presentation, the real one she'd been perfecting for months, she knew she was finally reclaiming something more valuable than any competition prize: her own power. The aftermath of the entrepreneurship competition spread through Stanford's campus like wildfire. Sarah sat in Dean Anderson's office 3 days later, watching as he reviewed the evidence on his tablet. Every screenshot, every logged attempt at unauthorized access, every manipulated conversation, it was all there, meticulously documented and time-stamped. "This is disturbing," he said finally, putting down the tablet. "And you say there are others?" Before Sarah could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Ashley Kim from the dance team entered, clutching a familiar-looking notebook. "I saw the video of the competition," Ashley said, her voice quiet but firm. "The way Jessica stole that proposal, it was exactly what she did with my choreography for the spring showcase." The dean gestured for her to sit. "Tell me more." And so it began. Like a dam breaking, the stories started flooding in. Marcus Chen from the coding club arrived next, with documented proof of how his startup idea had mysteriously appeared in Jessica's portfolio. 3 sophomores from the business ethics class came forward with evidence of how Jessica had manipulated group projects to take credit for their work. She had a system, Sarah explained, pulling up a digital map she created. She'd identify targets with promising ideas, isolate them from their support networks, then gradually take over their work while making them doubt their own capabilities. Professor Hammond, sitting in on the meeting, nodded gravely. "The research data inconsistencies in our ethics project, I should have seen it sooner." The investigation expanded beyond academic matters. The student housing office discovered Jessica had been running a sophisticated textbook theft ring, using stolen student IDs to access dorm rooms. The financial aid office found discrepancies in her scholarship applications, revealing a pattern of identity fraud spanning multiple universities. "It's like she was running a corporate espionage operation right here on campus," Maria commented as she documented the unfolding story for the Stanford Daily. "How did no one notice?" "People saw what they wanted to see," Sarah replied, thinking of her own past naivety. She was brilliant at making her victims feel like they were the ones at fault. The final blow came during an emergency student council meeting. Jessica, her perfect image now crumbling, attempted one last manipulation. "Everything I did was for the greater good," she declared, tears streaming down her face. "I was just trying to help connect people, to make sure the best ideas got the recognition they deserved, by stealing them." The words came from Michael Torres, who stood up from his seat. "I found the keylogger you installed on your laptop when I used it. Every project, every line of code, you took it all." Sarah watched as Jessica's facade finally shattered completely. The tears stopped abruptly, replaced by a cold fury she remembered from her previous life. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Sarah?" Jessica's voice dripped with venom. setting me up, turning everyone against me. I made you. Without me pushing you, challenging you, you'd still be that pathetic, naive girl who couldn't even speak up in class. The room fell silent. Sarah stood slowly, feeling the weight of both timelines in her response. No, Jessica, you didn't make me. You tried to break me. The only difference this time is that I saw you coming. As campus security arrived to escort Jessica from the building, Sarah caught a glimpse of her former roommate's expression, a mixture of rage and, for the first time, fear. The carefully constructed world Jessica had built was collapsing, and she had no more moves left to play. Later that evening, Sarah sat with Maria in their favorite coffee shop, watching as the sun set over the campus buildings. "What happens now?" Maria asked, reviewing the draft of her exposé article. Sarah took a sip of her vanilla latte. No longer the drink Jessica had always pushed her to order, but her own choice this time. "Now," she said, "we make sure this never happens to anyone else." 3 months after the Jessica Walsh incident, as it had come to be known on campus, Sarah stood at the podium in Stanford's Memorial Auditorium, addressing a packed house of students and faculty. "Digital security isn't just about protecting your passwords," she began, her voice carrying confidently through the space. "It's about understanding the patterns of manipulation that make social engineering possible." The presentation was part of a new initiative she developed with the university's cybersecurity department, turning her experience into a shield for others. In the audience, she could see Maria recording for the student paper, Michael nodding along with her points, and Ashley taking detailed notes. After her talk, Professor Hammond approached with a distinguished-looking woman in a crisp suit. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet Victoria Martins from Goldman Sachs. She's very interested in your EduTech Bridge platform." The meeting that followed wasn't just about investment potential, it was about implementation. Victoria saw beyond the business model to the heart of what Sarah had created, a system that could democratize education while protecting vulnerable students from exploitation. "We're not just looking for innovation," Victoria explained, her eyes sharp with interest. "We're looking for solutions that address real-world problems. Your experience with identifying and preventing academic fraud adds a unique layer to this project." Back in her dorm room, a single now, with plants thriving on the windowsill and no trace of vanilla-scented body spray, Sarah opened her laptop to find an email from the university board. They wanted to implement her digital security protocols across all departments, starting with the business school. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "Check the Stanford Daily site." The headline read, "Former Students' Manipulation Scheme Leads to Nationwide Campus Security Reform." Below it was a smaller headline, "EduTech Bridge Receives Major Investment, Set to Launch Beta Program Next Semester." Sarah smiled, remembering the frightened, betrayed girl she'd been in her previous life. The pain of that experience hadn't disappeared. Instead, it had transformed into something powerful, something protective. A knock at her door revealed Michael and Ashley, carrying takeout containers from their favorite Thai place. "Celebration dinner?" Michael grinned, holding up the bags. "Maria's on her way up too." As they spread the food across Sarah's study table, the conversation flowed naturally between business plans and personal dreams. No hidden agendas, no subtle manipulations, just genuine friendship built on trust and mutual support. "Have you heard?" Ashley asked between bites of pad thai. "Jessica tried to enroll at 3 other universities under different names. The new verification system you designed caught her each time." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Some people never changed, but she had. Later that night, after her friends had left, Sarah stood by her window, looking out at the campus lights twinkling in the darkness. Her phone showed an alert from her investment app. Chen Industries stock was up following the announcement of their partnership with EduTech Bridge. Her father had called earlier, proud of how she turned a painful experience into positive change. On her desk sat a framed quote she'd chosen to replace the old One Direction poster. "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy," Marcus Aurelius. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about transformation, not just her own, but the ripple effects of standing up to manipulation and creating systems to protect others. Her laptop pinged with a new email, an invitation to speak at a cybersecurity conference about student protection and digital ethics. As she typed her acceptance, Sarah reflected on how different this timeline was from her last one. In her previous life, she'd lost herself trying to survive Jessica's betrayal. In this one, she'd found herself by facing it head-on. The naive girl who trusted too easily hadn't disappeared. She'd evolved into someone stronger, wiser, but still capable of seeing the good in others. This was her real victory, not just reclaiming her future, but helping secure it for others. As she got ready for bed, Sarah smiled at her reflection, confident, resilient, and finally, completely herself.